report of Fjord, the famous, I would say famous report of Fjord trends. I say famous, it is probably you have seen it before in the Fast Co magazine and another well-reputed media. You can follow the conversation on Twitter. Fjord trends is one of the hashtags we're using. Another one is Mobile Week, and I think it's well, Mark, it's your time.
Okay, good, thank you. Thank you very much for welcoming me here. It's lovely to be back in Madrid. Really nice. So I'm just going to dive straight in because we've got an hour and there's quite a lot to get through. So my name is Mark Curtis and I'm one of the founders of Fjord and I'm Chief Client Officer. I'm not going to bore you with what that means, but it's, you know, I work out what our offer is in our marketing and do business development as well. My job is global, I'm based in London, but I get to travel around quite a lot. So let me tell you a little bit about, first of all, let me say if you've got any questions, there's a section for questions at the end, but I'm happy to take questions at any moment. If you want to challenge anything that I'm talking about, or add to it, or make comments on it, I'm incredibly happy for that to happen while we're talking, or you can leave it till the end. So how do we come up with the trends? What happens is that we talk to our clients really around about September time, and then we get all our staff together in one place as well, which we do every year, which we do for other reasons apart from trends, but we take the opportunity while we're there to talk to all our staff and our clients and try and understand what they think is going on out there and what they think is going to be impactful in the coming year. And then we spend a couple of months killing off the bad ideas and testing them and refining it down until we have something which looks pretty dense to us and realistic and we think is going to happen. The other thing we do is we try and filter trends. By the way, slow me down if I speak too fast. I have this habit of going too fast. We have this thing with trends where what we're interested in are not the trends which are going to be out there in 2020. Anybody can make predictions about 2020. So, you know, I'll give you one now. There'll be driverless cars in the streets of Madrid in 2020. That's not a difficult prediction to make. It's easy for me to do, and also, you're not going to come back in 2020 and check whether I was right or wrong about what I said in 2013. So we're not kind of very interested in looking that far out. What we're interested in are the things that are going to make an impact on our working lives and the working lives of our customers over the coming 12 months. And if I want to make that even more specific, the test point for a good Fjord trend would be that within the next year, people you know who don't do digital stuff will be talking to you about the trend. They'll be commenting on it. They might not call it a trend, but they might say, hey, have you seen this? I think this is interesting. And it might be your sister, or it might be your boyfriend, or it might be your mother. Wouldn't be my mother, but it might be your mother. And that's really our kind of test point for trends. So we have 10 of them this year. And I think as we go through it, I hope you'll see some patterns emerging in the trends. If I had to pick one out now, and it's totally unsurprising, it is that mobile is driving a lot of the trends in here. It is very difficult to talk about them without referring back to mobile again and again. So make no apologies about that, you're going to hear that. But you'll see some other patterns of stuff beginning to emerge out of the trends as well, hopefully. So the first one is about people. We think that what's happened over the last, actually it's more than a decade, is that the driving force behind the biggest disruption of all that digital has created has been people, and it's specifically been where peer-to-peer sharing has emerged. And peer-to-peer sharing has completely, I'm trying to think of disrupted the media and content industry in a way which nobody would have foreseen. So I seriously doubt, I started doing internet work in 94, 95. I totally doubt that there was any media executive alive on the planet. If you had said to them, fast forward 18 years and 80% of all content consumed on this new thing which you've heard about called the internet will be user-generated, not generated by companies like you at all, they just would not have believed it. This is a shattering number for media companies. And look at things like YouTube. The bandwidth they were consuming by 2007 was the entire bandwidth of the internet in 2001. So peer-to-peer has smashed apart the media industry and it is still reshaping itself as a result. But now we're beginning to see this happening in other industries as well. And I think this is one of the biggest trends that we have to look out for. And this trend, like many of the others, by the way, is not simply about this year. This trend is going to play out over the next 10 to 15 years big time. And the industry that it's hitting, first of all, is travel and transport. How many people in the room have used Airbnb? Okay, so quite a few. So quoting Airbnb is not exactly that kind of sexy or new, because quite a lot of people have used it already. But think about the disruption that they are having to the hotel industry and to travel sites. They're completely taking them out, especially at the mid-market. If I had to run a hotel at the moment, I'd like to run a very small one or a very big one. If I was running a middle-sized hotel, I'd be pretty frightened by what's happening here. But it isn't just accommodation, it's also transport as well. Is anyone aware of Lyft and Sidecar and Uber and the new wave of services in the US? So these really come to life when you take a trip in one of them. And they come to life when, I mean, there's probably, are there taxi apps in Madrid now?
Yeah.
There are. Okay, so I think taxi apps are amazing, and there's one in London called Halo, which is just growing incredibly fast now. What's amazing about the London one, Halo, uses traditional black cabs in London. And actually there's good reasons for that. They're very good, and they're clean, and they're safe, and they're well regulated. San Francisco cabs are not clean, they're not very safe, and they're very difficult to find on a foggy, wet evening. So Uber and Sidecar provide an immediate service because you can see where they are, you order them, they come towards you, you get in, and my killer moment, you get out and you don't pay because it's already been organised by the app, including the tip, by the way. So that seems to me to be an amazing new service, but it's peer-to-peer. And it's peer-to-peer because anybody with a smart car who's prepared to keep it clean, who wants to earn some extra money, can now become a taxi driver like that. Because what they've got is what I would call a two-way facing app. They've got a Janus app, faces towards the businesses, but it also faces towards the service provider, which is the taxi driver, which is just an ordinary person like me or you, and it faces towards the customer. And two other things that make this, I think, a killer example of peer-to-peer. The users can rate the drivers, but of course the drivers can also rate the users. So that's classic peer-to-peer activity. So if you get in the cab and you're sick in the back of it, you're not going to get another ride from Lyft or Uber because the taxi driver can note it, it goes on your record, etc., etc. So that two-way rating is a real example of peer-to-peer. And there's another example of the reason why it's so disruptive at the moment, is that the incumbent. Remember what happened with music? So Napster came along, which was probably the first really big peer-to-peer play most people have heard of. Napster came along and was so disruptive to the music industry that they went out of their way to sue it out of existence, which they succeeded in doing, pretty much. It's back in a different format. What's happening with the taxi and chauffeur thing is all the taxi companies in all the cities where it's launched in the US have now gone to the municipal authorities and they are trying to get these services banned. So all of the advantages that I've just sold you on, the benefits of these services, the incumbent companies are fighting back. That's a good sign that something very big is happening here. Yeah?
Just a question. What you kind of saying is that in the future, anyone could give an individual service in any area?
Yeah.
Over here, if you want to get a car, I mean, there's some regulation, and you can get into that service so easily.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know how it works in London.
So it's funny, I was talking about this in, actually it was just one person in Paris last week, and they made almost exactly the same comment. They said, this isn't going to work in France because there's too many regulations, etc., etc. So I think it will. I think it's just a matter of time. I think what will happen is many people in this room will travel to America or Britain or some other country where this stuff is happening, and they'll come back and they'll say, this needs to be happening in our country. And sooner or later, the pressure will break through, and this stuff will happen.
So basically, what you are trying to say is that in the future, this means that I think
It's for the video.
It's for the video.
I feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, me too. Go on.
What you see in the future is that anyone can give whatever service, and it's going to be like a huge net, all interconnected for giving and services.
I think that puts it very well. There's an example on the next page of where this is going, because I think that puts it very well. We'll come back to it. So, underpinning all of this is peer-to-peer funding. So, anybody who's ever raised money from venture capital will know that it's not an experience they're in a rush to repeat. You know, it's brutal. And what's more, you get somebody sitting on your board and you have to, you know, meet their needs, and quite fairly, they give them your money. But how much better to go to the market and have 5,000 people funding your business? That's better because, okay, so you've got 5,000 people who you need to communicate with, and that creates some overhead, and you can't have a board meeting with all 5,000 people. But the really killer bit is you've got 5,000 advocates who can go out and market for you. And marketing is the biggest challenge in digital at the moment for any startup. So, as a startup, I would much rather have 5,000 advocates than I would just one. So, this makes sense on a whole number of different levels. Kickstarter, Indiegogo, things like that. And I think, and I'm not going to go through every single example we've got. Hopefully you can read it on the screens. And, you know, we think Etsy is a very good example of this. I just want to pick out a couple. One is 3D printing is the next place where we're going to see this big time. So we had a bit of an argument about whether we should put 3D printing in the trend. And what sealed the argument was Staples, who are a very big chain of utility stores in the US, announced that they're going to be having a 3D printer in every store by the end of this year. So that's definitely now meeting the needs of, my sister might be talking about it by the end of the year. And what's interesting about 3D printing is it carries with it all the characteristics of something where peer-to-peer sharing is going to be a very, very large part of it. Because I can create designs, I can share them with other people, and they can print them and use them. So we think 3D plus peer-to-peer is very important. The last point on here comes back to what you were saying, TaskRabbit. Is anyone familiar with TaskRabbit? 2 or 3. So TaskRabbit is a new startup in the US which allows peer-to-peer sharing of services. All services. So I can go on TaskRabbit if I live in a city where TaskRabbit exists, and I can advertise for people to come and do my garden, or to come and do my ironing, or to come and mend some plumbing that I can't mend myself, which is all plumbing in my case. And TaskRabbit is an army of volunteers who get paid for what they do. So it becomes a small job exchange. And if you think that doesn't sound very big, what really caught our eye was that TaskRabbit partnered with Gap over the Christmas period, and Gap were giving $25 vouchers for every $75 you spent in the Gap for use with TaskRabbit. And, this is a clever bit, they had TaskRabbit volunteers in each Gap store wrapping presents and offering to deliver them to the people's homes. So they were really getting their message out. So TaskRabbit is one to watch, and I think fits with the vision that you were outlining about, you know, lots and lots of people exchanging different services at a community level. So that's the first one, and I think a big kind of scene setter for many of the others actually. And the suggestions that we have for people, if you're looking at this, is and thinking, what does this mean for us? I don't think are particularly difficult to imagine. I think you've got to think about whether your business is vulnerable to attack from peer-to-peer, because you don't want to end up like the record labels. Nobody wants to end up like the record labels. Their business got smashed apart by peer-to-peer. And look for those new business models. And even if you can't do it yourself, see whether you have brand permission to get out there and facilitate this for other people to do it. Because in the end result, you know, the only true peer-to-peer is when I step forward and I exchange something with Gwen here. But in most cases, digitally, there's always an intermediary of some kind, like TaskRabbit or like Fjord. Make sense? Good. So the second one is about data. So we had quite a lot of debate about whether big data was a trend that we wanted to put in this year, and I think we felt in the end that we were just not hearing enough from our clients that they were actually in the position to be able to use big data. They're aware of it and they're thinking about it, and the CIO is thinking about it quite hard, but they haven't actually begun to position all the building blocks into place to really make it happen. And then we realised that the flip side of it, which is customers' concern over their own data, is something we're now hearing a lot about. A personal story on this: shortly after Christmas I had lunch with somebody in London who is completely not digital. He's our headhunter for Fjord, and he's very, very English. He's ex-army, and he was a major in the army, and sort of got straight back, talks very straight. And I was telling him, he asked me about the trends, so I told him about this one, and I wasn't expecting him to pay any attention to it at all. He said, "Oh yes," he said, "I know about this one." And I said, "Tell me." He said, "This is his Instagram stuff. I've not put my photos on there." And I was really pleased, because I thought this is real validation for the trend. If somebody like Peter is thinking that now, this suggests that data is a very, very big issue for a lot of people out there. So there's a lot of stuff that we could unpack here, and we could spend hours talking about it. And one thing I'd like to do is make clear that we see a very important distinction, as many people already do, between aggregate data and individualized data. And very roughly, the story is that the individualized data is where there are very, very high user concerns, because they don't want to be trackable to their house, to put it in one way. Aggregate data, where you get to share your data with other people and it's anonymized, and you get some benefit back from the service in return for sharing the data, that's actually something which consumers have much lower thresholds of concern over. So this is an important distinction. It's important because you need to make it clear when you're taking data from the customer and thinking about using it. You need to make it clear that you're using it in the aggregate sense, not in an individualized sense. Unless, of course, you are using it in an individualized sense, in which case you need to get a whole stack load of permission from the customer. And you need to make it super simple for them to understand. You know, terms and conditions, what I would call the Instagram mistake, are not good enough. You've got to really make it clear at the point of data collection what you're doing. But the aggregate data begins to look pretty interesting. So Citibank, I think, did this very well with their iPad app about a year and a half ago, which aggregated together data from all their users and allowed you to see what your petrol usage was like compared to everyone else's petrol usage. And that's an important and interesting piece of information. I'm not sure that it's yet gone nearly enough. So I think the mistake we're still making with aggregate data is that we're not allowing the users to get down into detail in it enough. Has anyone used a Nike Fuel Band in the room? No one's used a Nike Fuel Band. Okay, I'm a case study of one. So Fitbit. So I haven't used Fitbits, I've only used Fuel Bands, so I can only speak about that from but one of the disappointing things is that it's got some great aggregate data, which is you can see the other users and their average usage per day. So you can see, basically, you can measure yourself against other people. I think the mistake they've made is not gone down into granular enough detail, because once I spent a day looking at everyone else, I begin to think, well, that's fine, but there's probably a whole load of 20-year-old fit as hell blokes in there, and I'm 50 and I want to know what I'm doing against my peer group, not them, because that's more meaningful to me. So I think that divvying up of stuff into clearer bits of data is very important. I think also, if you feed back individualised data to customers and show them stuff which is really meaningful to them, they will also give you a lot more permission. So a good example of that is something which we did with 3 in Scandinavia. So this is not rocket science. We created an app which is a new way of looking at your mobile bill. And all it does is it uses data visualization to show you your activity in real time. So it takes away the idea of a bill which you only get once a month, because what it's doing is it's creating a real-time picture for you of what's happening on your phone. Now think about what you normally get from a carrier. What you normally get, if you're lucky, on your app on your phone, you can find out the amount of data you've used this month. Let's call it 343 megabytes. Out of your total allocation, let's call it 1,024 megabytes, and it's now the 17th of February. What do I do with that information? Why not just show me a graph which shows me how much I've got left? It's so simple. But it's only now that one carrier worldwide has bothered to do this with my data. If they did, I probably wouldn't have permission to do a lot more. So there's a lot of stuff happening. There's an Austrian student called Max Schrems who's launched a class action suit against Facebook. I don't think he stands a chance in hell, not up against Facebook's lawyers, but it's interesting that people are beginning to do stuff like that. And the EU legislation this year needs to be observed very, very closely indeed, because that may make some very big differences. And we predict, with, I think, confidence, the rise of new services like Unroll Me, which allow people to manage their data and take control back over their privacy, because this is something which is of very real concern to people. One thing I'd single out on here, which I think is super interesting in particular, at the top, so State Farm Insurance and Ford are now gathering actuarial, they're gathering data about your driving direct from the vehicle and feeding it live back into your insurance stats. This is not going to be the last time we hear this. So start thinking about this not only in the world of cars, but also in the world of health. You won't see it in health this year, I don't think. And I'm not aware of any insurance company in the planet who's interested in seeing a feed from Runkeeper or Fitbit, but there should be. And one day soon, they will start taking those feeds. And then they're going to start coming under pressure to create differential premiums between those people who give them their health details via a stream of activity like that, and those people who don't. And then we're going to see some very big public morality debates about whether people should be penalised for being fat and not taking exercise, or whether they should be allowed to have lower premiums because they're fit and do take exercise. And of course beyond that is the shadow of DNA and what that's going to mean for insurance. So this is going to become very, very big, and there's going to be a big moral public debate about this. It's all kind of hidden away up in the top left-hand corner there, but I think it's an important one, this dichotomy. Does that make sense? Yeah, good. So, what you do about that is make sense of big data for the little guy, because that's really what this is all about. And I think help turn customer data into actionable insights. There is a wealth of contextual issues which challenge doing this. So I was sitting in Fjord's Madrid office today at 11:30, and Runkeeper came up with a helpful little notification on my phone. Runkeeper is a running app, if you haven't seen it. Came up with a helpful little notification on the front of my phone, which I've actually taken a photograph of it because it's such a bad example. And it reminded me that a week ago I thought 11:30 on a, what day is it today, Tuesday, was a good day to go for a run, because I was working from home that day, and I took the opportunity to go for a run in the middle of the morning. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I can't go for a run now. I'm sitting in the office in Madrid and there's no way I can go for a run. So it was a very unhelpful piece of information which really, really annoyed me. So turning it into actionable insights is fraught with difficulty and needs care. So I just need a quick drink of water. So we expect to see many, many, many more devices. Next week it's Mobile World Congress, and I think one of the things we're going to see there is an explosion of what some people call smart devices coming to market. So these are not phones, they are other things like the Fitbit, like Nike Fuel Band, like the Nest thermostat, which has just taken America apart, like with things body scales, which are the Wi-Fi enabled scales, which measure your fat content and your weight, and then stream all that to the cloud. We're going to see an explosion of those next week at Mobile World Congress, and we'll see many more come out this year. What we're also going to see is we're going to see the beginnings, that's why we called this dawn of the personal ecosystem, of the aggregation of that information, or the aggregation of those services together into a kind of mega service. But you won't see any winners emerge this year, I very much doubt. Unless, we didn't know, by the way, when we put this together, we didn't know the rumours about the Apple Watch. Unless Apple make a completely spectacular play this year and move very fast, I don't think Apple and Google are yet in a position to win this. So that's opening up opportunities for other people to come in and aggregate together stuff and then create an ecosystem around that. So a good example of that is With Things. So With Things make this body scale, and it's it's a Wi-Fi enabled body scale. So you stand on it every morning, it weighs you, sends it to the cloud. You can track your weight loss or horribly your gain every day. You can see some charts. That's all very useful. But what With Things also now do, if you check out the app, is they also take feeds from Runkeeper. So now they've added in fitness into the whole thing, alongside your daily weight. But they also measure your sleep. So they don't sell you the sleep device, that comes to you courtesy of, I can't remember the name. I'll remember it by the end of the day. So you can get sleep devices, which have got 4 key health and wellness indicators, not all of which With Things are doing, all flowing through the same app, providing you with a picture. These guys are what we call the dawn of the personal ecosystem. They've not quite cracked it yet, but they're getting pretty close. And there's another thing here which I think is very interesting from a commercial perspective, which is easy to lose. So last year in the Q4, Verizon's CEO stood up and announced at a conference that they were doing something called Share Everything. So what he said memorably was, this is a carrier. So those of you who've worked with carriers will be familiar with how important this is. He said, we're not measuring ARPU anymore. We're now measuring ARPA. That's average revenue per account. And he went on to explain that in upmarket American households, the kinds that they really want as customers, people have several iPads, several phones, and a range of other devices like the body scales as well. They're not interested in viewing just you and your phone anymore. They're interested in the big aggregated picture of what's going on in your house with all your devices and giving you a package which meets your needs, because you don't want to have, you know, as I'm sure many people in the room do, you don't want to have a separate account for every single device you've got. How much more convenient to have all that aggregated together. So we're seeing the aggregation both at the service level, but also at the, if you like, at the billing level, at the connectivity level, coming from Verizon, and I thought that was particularly interesting. A couple of other things to watch here is Bluetooth Low Energy. So Bluetooth Low Energy means you can now have a small device which runs Bluetooth, can be powered for up to a year. Now that's beginning to become quite user-friendly, not having to worry about changing the batteries every time, you know, every month or 2 months. So Bluetooth Low Energy might well drive quite a lot of change here. We're seeing other things, but things like the Goodnight lamp, which is a basic Wi-Fi connected lamp which works all over the world. So if you're traveling, you can show your children you've gone to sleep, or you can see when they've gone to sleep. It has a number of other applications as well. And then a talking teddy bear. So you may be thinking, why did they put a talking teddy bear on the screen? So what is interesting about this is the first talking teddy bear I've ever heard of that has raised over $10 million from venture capitalists. And it's founded by 2 people who were leading lights at Pixar. So that's certainly something worth watching, because what they're doing with this is they're connecting it. It won't surprise you, it sits next to a tablet. And anybody who's got children has seen the way children have responded viscerally to tablets. So why not have a bear that works with the tablet? So there's going to be a lot of activity in this area. One more thing to do is to watch the wrist. It looks likely that Apple will launch something for the wrist this year, or maybe early next. Google probably competes as well. There's other players out there, Nike, Adidas, who we work with. There's a lot going on, and once you begin to explore the idea of what a wrist-driven smart device can do, especially if it's touchscreen, then you begin to realise that designing for the glance is going to become very, very important, and it's going to intensify the next trend. So that's dawn of the personal ecosystem. The big thing here, I think, is think about what small devices you might be able to get into. I think what Nike have done is fascinating. They've really branched out with the Fjord band. So, this is not new, and for designers it's especially not new, but it is now what we're hearing our customers talking about a lot, which is they're now powerfully advocating the virtues of simplicity internally, and that's really a big change in the zeitgeist. And my favourite example here is Square. So it's easy to talk about Square because they've initiated such a revolution. What's less easy to remember about Square is the revolution is not really with the customer. Has anyone, how many people have paid with Square or with PayPal's here? So I think you'd agree that from a customer point of view, it's about as many movements as you would take to pay anyway with an ordinary credit card, machine. What's different is they simplified it for the merchant massively. So what they did was an amazing job of stripping everything out of the way so that the merchant, I don't know about Spain, but in the UK, typically if you want to sign up to be a credit card merchant, it's £600 or £700 for the machinery alone, which is outrageous when you think how much an iPhone costs. And you have to put down deposits, and you have to pay through the nose for it, which is why so many traders don't want to do it. Square took all of that away. And that's enormous. So what I love about my own personal favourite Square was in New York in the summer with my family, walking through Central Park, and you know, it's hot, and there are the usual kind of jazz bands, and there are the usual, you know, people painted silver and gold doing that thing, and then there's this woman sitting under a tree with a table with art on it, and we walk over, and my wife wanted to buy one of these small bits of art that she'd done, which was only $20, but we didn't have any dollar notes on us. So we were just about to, and I said, we can't pay it. And she said, that's okay, I can take payments on this. And she pulled out her iPhone, she plugged in Square. I knew about Square, but my wife was just watching this with a, you know, open mouth. The significance of it was that she'd become a shop under a tree. And that, I think, is a big change. So simple is very big, and we're hearing a lot of customers, people like PayPal, for example, saying they're now taking simplicity as a core organisational discipline. But I wanted to share with you something which actually one of our designers wrote a week ago. So he'd seen the trends and thought about it a lot. And he's written a little piece on our website where he pointed out how difficult simple is. So it's very easy to talk about simple, but it turns out it's very difficult. And I noted down he talked about 5 reasons why simple is tough. The first one is simple is a guilty pleasure. So it doesn't actually sound that good to a lot of people, because simple is also associated with stupid. So really? You want to be simple? That doesn't sound so good. But we know when we think about it, in theory, that simple is good. The second reason is simple is hard to sell to big companies. So if you're selling something to a big company based on simple, you go and you say, well, actually, it's going to be very simple. Well, why would we buy something simple? We spend our money on difficult, complex bits of technology. Why would we buy something hard? The third thing is, simple doesn't look very good in wireframes. I thought that was just a great point. It looks good when you colour in the pictures, but it doesn't look so good when you just bare bones. And it looks like, well, there's something missing here. So then you feel this emotional urge to put stuff in. Then he said, and I like this a lot, simple is a priority for clever people. So a lot of clever people have got where they are by being good at handling complexity. Telling them how to handle simplicity goes completely against the grain of how they've got to the position they have. And the last thing he said, and I think this also is true, is simple gets harder the longer a project goes on. And towards the end of a project, you get people trying to throw stuff into the bucket, and that makes it much tougher. So I thought that was very good. I think that helps explain why keep it simple, stupid sounds easy, but it's actually very, very difficult. And it means being ruthless about prioritisation. And to make it really more pointed, again and again and again, we've heard stories of people who really struggle to simplify internally because the organisational structure gets in the way of it. There's the savings division, and there's the loans division, and there's the insurance division, and they all want to be on the home page of the app. But they can't all be on the home page of the app if you're going to simplify it. So somebody has to make the cut. That then gets very difficult in organisational terms. So again, this is one of the areas where mobile really has a very dramatic role to play. We think that of several industries which are ripe for transformation, the pain that we're going to hear in retail over the next few years is going to be extreme. And although I can't justify this, I'd be happy to look back in 5 years' time and see whether it was right or wrong. I would guess that at least a third of all shops will disappear from what in Britain we call the high street over the next 5 years. I don't think they've got any longer. And I think it will be the mid-market shops that suffer the most. The big ones, the Walmarts, the Tesco's, they're investing pretty heavily in this stuff now because they can see it coming. The very small ones, the corner shops, the place where you go for a light bulb because it's gone at the weekend, They'll probably survive because you'll still have light bulbs that blow up at the weekend. The difficult ones are going to be the mid-market retailers. I'd be worried right now if I was running a chain of 40 stores across a Western European country or America. Very worried indeed. Why? First of all, mobile is changing the shape of shops. And it's changing the shape of shops because what's happening at the tail end of the purchasing cycle, which is you hand over your money, is changing shape altogether. And it's the mobile wallet which is doing that. And you know, probably everyone in the room is aware that the fight over the mobile wallet at the moment is very intense. And it's intense because there's a lot of different people playing in that space. And some of them are extremely well funded. So they include banks, they include telcos, they include independents like PayPal and Square, who probably at the moment roughly have the lead, we think. They include people like Foursquare who'd like to play in this space, or Groupon who'd like to play in this space. And I probably missed out a couple of sectors. It's a very, very intensely competitive space. Once you change what's happening at the point of payment, the rest of the shop almost in reverse, so it's at the end of the experience. But the rest of the shop changes shape because you've changed what happens at the end of the experience. And if you haven't been to one of the new Apple stores where they now have app payment in store, if you have been, you'll know what I mean. Because what happens now is that you go in, you get out your phone, you open your app shopping cart, you find the thing you want, you scan the barcode, you pay using iTunes, you then walk out of the shop. Now this is a shop with some very high value kit in it, and you're able to walk out. So 9 months ago, we heard people say, well, this is never going to happen, or it's going to be difficult to happen. What about security? Well, Apple seems to have sorted that, and they've got, you know, some pretty expensive kit there. So when that happens, that changes. That eliminates the needs for tills, or most tills. Then you free up a lot of space, and space is king for a retailer. You free up a lot of space and you change the shape of the experience. If I can buy when I see something in the shop, rather than have to go somewhere else, that changes the whole experience and changes the shape of the shop. So that's very, very big indeed. And then, of course, on top of that, you've got the you know, other, what you might call killer apps going on, like price comparison. So price comparison is fine on the web, but it becomes a horrible, dangerous weapon when you put it on the mobile, which is why half of US smartphone users have used devices in store to check prices, and a lot of them abandon. I can get it cheaper somewhere else, or online. I'll go somewhere else. So all retailers who have their thinking on are now beginning to think very long and hard about what they do about this. And so you see experiments like Tesco. So Tesco's are launching virtual grocery at Gatwick Airport this year. So when you're leaving Gatwick, which is not usually, it's a holiday airport, so there's often a lot of families passing through. You're leaving Gatwick to go away for 2 weeks in the middle of the summer to Spain. You can now go to Tesco's virtual wall, or you will be able to in the summer, and say, when I get back, I need cornflakes, I need milk, I need bread. Being English, you need Marmite. And you touch your buttons, and it gets sent to your home. So that means that suddenly the airport has become a shop in a completely unexpected way. And if you haven't seen it, I'd urge you to find, there's now a quite legendary photograph of Tesco's experiment with this in South Korea, where they're doing it in underground subway stations. And it's quite jaw-dropping when you realise that the man in the side, you see his leg, is stepping onto a train, and there's another man actually buying off the wall. Now I think that changes a lot. And then we then push way beyond this. So, and it was a guy from Google I first heard talk about this, but I think which is that everywhere becomes a shop. And we have the technology now, because image recognition is beginning to be perfected. So, you know, if I like Klein's jacket, and I can point my phone at it, I can find out where the jacket came from, and I buy it now. If I'm in a steak restaurant tonight and the knives are brilliant, and I think I could do some steak knives like this at home, great, I'll buy them then and there. Suddenly everywhere is a shop. That again dramatically changes the way in which commerce works, and it changes retail. Yes?
So at the beginning you mentioned that, and it's obvious from the examples that you gave, that this will change the retail landscape, that a lot of shops won't be able to hold their retail. Are you thinking about how is this going to impact how people experience cities differently if they don't go to high street to go shopping, and what's the societal impact?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question, and I think there's a degree with the trend that we can't sort of dive too deep into the long-term societal impacts, or we wouldn't be able to get through them in an hour, which I'm struggling to do. But I think that that does beg. I mean, if we're right and a third of all shops disappear, then that creates a whole load of free real estate, and then you begin to wonder what they'll do. What will happen with that real estate? We'll come on to it in a moment, but experience becomes much more important. Actually, I should have said, there are three things you can do if you're involved in this game. The first one is obvious, it's price, but that's just a race to the bottom, and it doesn't, it's not going to help anyone. It kills margins, especially with the economy as being as bad as it is. The second thing you can do is then focus very hard on providing a memory, doing CRM, so a memory of customers' purchases, and trying to become more and more like becoming very helpful for the customer, basically, because you know them and you understand them and you've got a lot of contextual data about them. So we're going to see a lot of activity around that, and then the third area will be in the in-store experience itself. So there'll be a great deal of focus on that. And the lines between online and offline in retail will become irrelevant. There just won't be a distinction between the two. Okay. So the sixth trend is about how we consume things. And we believe that we're beginning to see a trend where what matters to people more is the experiences they have, which is why I just mentioned experience, rather than actually owning things. So ownership is beginning to lose its luster. That's quite a big statement to make. But if you think about music, it's completely true. So those of us who grew up and bought, how many people in the room spent a lot of money on music when they were younger? Okay, good. So I'm not alone. I mean, I don't dare quantify it, but it's a lot of money. And I've got the records, which my children look at and laugh at. And I've got the CDs, which I don't think they really understand. And if I was anally retentive, which I'm not, I'd have them arranged in racks in my house, in alphabetical order, or arranged by colour, which I know one person did. And I would have invested a lot of servicing time in this stuff which I owned as I went from house to house and rebuilt the shelves and reordered them, etc., etc. Spotify. Honestly, why would you bother? You just wouldn't. And my children certainly won't. For them, they'll pay, but they'll pay to get the access to all the music they want, as we've begun to do already. And it's not just music. We think it's going to happen in other places as well. So check out what's happening in fashion. So you can now, companies like Lending Luxury and Rent the Runway, you can hire fashion for the weekend. Rent the Runway's one of the strap lines they got on their website, just looking at a moment ago. Cinderella dreams, shoestring budget, no problems. Lovely, clear exposition of what they're all about. So it's now happening in fashion, it's happening in publishing. So publishers are looking at ways in which you can lend books rather than buy it. Because why would you have that book on your Kindle? I mean, you're unlikely to go back to it for a very long time. And when you do want to go back to it, you probably just pay for access again. And the same is true with cars. So I think cars in particular, it's increasingly looking like a really dumb idea to own a car in a big city. In the countryside, yeah, you probably need to, but definitely not in the city. Especially when you can share with other people. And you can temporarily hire it from someone like Zipcar, you've just sold to Avis, or you can actually use a neighbour's car. And there may be other things that you could use of your neighbours as well, like their dryer. Why does everyone have to have a dryer in their house? Why not share them? So underpinning this, we think that there is a very, very big change as well, which is a change in the way in which we appreciate status. And we suspect, although I couldn't prove it, that this is being driven by social media. So if you look at Facebook, people don't tend to boast about the things they own. They boast, and they do boast, about the things they've done. In fact, they boast about the things they're doing because they do it live, like on Twitter and on Facebook. And they're getting status from that, and we all know it, even if we're uncomfortable with it, that it's primarily display behaviour, and it's driven by, you know, Darwinian evolution. So that's quite deep. If we're changing our concept of what matters to us as status away from owning that house in the south of France to doing something cool when you go scuba diving, that's a very big shift. And just possibly, that again is being driven by mobile, because our mobile lifestyles are allowing us to display what we're doing in real time. Sorry, go on.
I'm going to go again. Are you seeing any trends that people are giving up their own mobile and so this is the meta-access. Is the mobile or the iPad or the computer the only thing we will keep owning, or are we also going to just have one everywhere that we can have access to what gives us access to?
No, I haven't seen that yet.
What's your opinion?
That yet. One observation on mobiles is it's quite socially acceptable to see someone else's computer in a meeting and start doing something like, here, I'll show you, you know, this website that we're talking about, etc., and do it collaboratively. Do the same thing with an iPad. It's fairly socially unacceptable to grab someone's phone without asking permission first. And even then, they might look, depending on what they've been doing with it, very uncomfortable. So that tells something about how close it is to us. This is a difficult one to plan for, but strategically, it's got to be worth asking the question, what are we doing around status with our product? And how is, if this is right, and values around status are changing, are we keeping our brand up to date with that and our service offering up to date with that? There's also, so we mentioned retail, where there's massive change happening. The scale of change happening in education is also phenomenal. And you're going to have to forgive me because I can't remember all the numbers straight up, so I'm going to check them in a moment. But what's happening here is an acronym. I'll confess I hadn't heard until October last year, which is MOOCs. And we're beginning to hear MOOCs more and more. I know of at least one telco who's already beginning to investigate this area very, very seriously. And I suspect that other carriers are beginning to realise that it's massively in their interest to get on top of education very fast indeed. So the two key changes here have been video and the tablet. So the general, we reached, I think, at some invisible stage about the last couple of years, the stage where 3G plus broadband gave us enough video access and enough usability of video for video to become a purposeful learning and training tool. And then along came the tablet, and it turns out that's a wonderful device for absorbing and mastering content on. So we're now seeing, and the third one is probably the Khan Academy. So if you've not seen the Khan Academy videos, where you can go back to school and learn lots and lots of stuff, all done via really very elegantly, it's quite ugly, but it works very well, video training. It's just astonishing, and they have 3,600 videos now. So the results of this, and this is where I think the numbers become quite shocking. Last year, and it was only last year, the two best-known companies doing MOOCs in the world, Udacity and Coursera, they only launched last year. And Udacity had a course, was it Udacity or Coursera? Coursera had a course, they had 2 million users by the end of the year, and they had one course where they had 180,000 users, and the course was on how to reason and argue. 180,000 people from nowhere doing one course. There's an 11-year-old girl in Lahore, Pakistan, who did their most advanced physics course last year. I think this is pretty spectacular change. And the significance for us is we may be working in this area, or it may be that you're working in a company which is going to have to begin to do this stuff pretty rapidly, because this is the way in which people are going to expect to learn. So your users, your customers' expectations, but also employees' expectations around learning and education are going to change very rapidly. So lots of change to come in learning, and much more accelerated than you might think at first glance. Sorry, I'm just getting more time. We think voice is going to go very big this year. So there's been lots and lots of speculation about voice interaction. The reason why, and this is a guess, and I'll say now that if we if any of you bothered, and I'm sure you weren't doing the exercise at the end of this year of saying how right were those guys, this is the one where there's most risk that we're not right. There's evidence, but there's some breakthrough needed. So the guesswork evidence is this. Siri isn't great, and we know that yet. And Google Voice isn't great, and we know that yet. But they've been out in the market long enough now for them to be getting to a tipping point where they're getting enough data back from people who are experimenting with them to begin to refine the products to a stage where they become truly usable. And our guess, based on things we've seen in the past, is that tipping point is now, and that you'll see some new versions of Siri and Google Voice come out this year, which will be genuinely useful and will be useful, I'm going to make an English joke now, by Australians, which currently they're not, because Siri doesn't understand Aussies. Most of us don't understand Australians. So they're going to become useful at that stage. If you've not seen it, go online and just type in Google Voice versus Siri, and look at the first two things you'll see. Ars Technica and Gizmondo have done 2 reviews on them side by side. And if you're interested in voice, it'll actually tell you a lot more about it than I possibly can in the next 2 minutes. Because the Gizmondo one in particular is an 18-minute video, which shows you how they respond to the same instructions side by side, and it's very telling. But a couple of bits of evidence that we've got so far on this. One is that after we published this, Samsung announced at CES a new range of smart TVs, and they're going to be voice and gesture controlled, which isn't really a big surprise. But when those begin to hit the living room, that is going to it's going to raise people's expectations around voice and where else they expect to see it. And that will happen, we think, quite quickly, especially with television. It won't happen necessarily in your home. Your children will probably go to some rich person's home who's got the new Samsung Smart TV, and they'll come home and say, that was really cool, and they'll tell you about it, and then you think, we need to have that as well. So these things spiral pretty quickly, and children will often lead the way. I'm serious, I think children have a big role to play in this. My children experiment with Siri endlessly. I got bored with it after the first go, but they experiment with it endlessly. The second thing is that, this is quite us-focused, but we've had our first brief on this just this week. And it's not from an organisation you would expect to be asking for voice interaction. So that suggests to us that we're not too far off the mark on this one. So 2 more. How are we doing? Fine, we're almost there. So this is an enormous important commercial issue. I would say it's the biggest commercial issue that I've touched on in everything we've talked about so far. And it's terribly simple. The speed at which ordinary people, one writer in the UK called them normobs, normal people who use mobile, the speed at which normobs have adopted the smartphone as their principal means of digital interaction has moved way, way faster than most organisations have been able to update their business models to adapt to it. And the result is a chasm in which they are not making money. And it's a massive issue. It's especially an issue if your business was based, for example, on internet advertising, and now you've shifted, your users have drifted over, not drifted, they've hurtled over to mobile and smartphones and now iPads. And we've all seen the Mary Meeker stats about how quickly tablets are growing compared to how quickly smartphones grew compared to how quickly iPods grew. This is accelerating, and it's created this commercial gap. And again, large organisations and small ones are saying, we're not making money out of mobile users as quickly as we made money out of internet users, and we have not yet cracked the business model for how to do so. There's a number of other issues wrapped up in that. One of them, for example, I'm sure some of you are aware of, is that Google control 90% of the mobile advertising space, which is an enormous amount. So if you're in the advertising industry at the moment, chances are, and you're doing mobile, you kind of regard Google with a mixture of loathing, fear and love, because they're pretty much the only game in town. Apple haven't cracked it. In fact, the most revealing comments I heard about Apple and advertising was on stage at a conference last year in America, and there was this guy, he was the group chairman, he was the global chairman for Group M, the media buying agency. And he was a guy in his early 60s, and you could tell that he had, he'd been around a bit. And he said, he spoke on stage, and then the CEO of News Corp came on stage, and he talked, and he was asked, do you think Apple are going to crack mobile advertising? He said, Apple will never crack advertising, and the reason why they'll never crack it is because they won't take people like him. He was pointing to this old media guy. They won't take people to him like him for lunch. It's not how Apple work. It's not their modus operandi. So you can hear this enormous culture gap between the advertising industry and the way in which the technology industry largely works. Google, I think, have cracked it. Apple, I think, I'm not so optimistic will get there on advertising. So lots of challenges around mobile advertising and how that works. And we've seen this play out with companies like Facebook, who possibly have begun to crack it now. But when we wrote this trend, they were still going like that. The share price is going like that. They've come back up because it looks like they're beginning to work out how to make money out of mobile advertising. Zynga is another example. They were the darlings of Wall Street just 2 years ago. And people have moved so quickly to mobile that Zynga don't know how to make money out of it. I think there is another issue buried in the mobile gap, which is mobile discovery. So there is still no app store which is anything remotely, not even as 1%, as efficient or as good as Google for finding things. And that creates a whole long tail of woe for companies trying to market themselves and distribute themselves, because Google Play and the iOS store, obviously the two big games in town, just are not efficient marketplaces. So the mobile gap has got a number of structural issues embedded in it. Advertising, the inefficiency of the marketplaces, and the fact that people haven't worked out how to make money from it yet. I'm not saying this just for the benefit of our hosts, but very seriously, we do think that banks and companies like PayPal have been much faster to understand this than anyone else, and in our experience have moved in a much more innovative way to try and grasp the mobile user. So curiously, in a world where people can be quite negative about banks, there's a lot the rest of the world can learn from the way in which banks have attacked this. There's also a lot the rest of the world can learn from developing markets like Africa and Latin America, for the obvious reason that they haven't got the legacy of having been through the desktop internet to the same degree as Western Europe and the US. And as a result, they become mobile-first nations, and we will see business models emerging from those nations, which we will then learn from and want to apply in the West. And probably the key point here is what mobile is doing is it's forcing services to atomize and break into little chunks. And we've all got a lot of deep thinking to do about how we make money out of those little chunks. So the last one is an unusual one. And it's unusual because it's not really based on, lots of examples of startups or of new services or new technology. It's much more about how businesses operate. And we've detected a very strong groundswell of opinion coming within companies we work with and talk to, that organisational change is, big organisational change is required over the next couple of years to deal with the way in which digital technology is impacting them, and that this is causing all kinds of quite difficult issues internally. We like to think of this as think like a startup. And it's think like a startup because, in your dreams, you can create $1 billion worth of value with just 13 people, which is what Instagram did. Or you can disrupt the entire carrier industry globally with 30 people, which is what WhatsApp have done. I presented this to a carrier in another country a couple of weeks ago, and there was the board, and they all turned white when they saw the WhatsApp thing, because they don't like them, and there's very good reason why they don't like them, and they've done it, on a very low base of numbers of people. And it's very difficult for large organisations to think like a startup and move like that. But there will be an increased momentum towards trying to create structures which allow for much more innovation and much more rapid engagement. And it sounds a bit nerdy, but one of the interesting things here is a strong trend towards taking what was originally a tool that developers used to create code quickly, which was agile and lean, and applying that to the entire way in which projects run. So it doesn't just have to be something that technologists do. It turns out that this project management skill is something that we're all engaging in as we try and respond more quickly. And we're seeing teams reshape and cluster, and certainly at a Fjord level, we're hearing clear demands from our clients that we need to change our shape as well and work more closely and work in different and more collaborative ways, which we're doing, in order to meet the new needs of organisations. There's one more point on here which I think is is very interesting, which is a sort of inexorable demographic fact. So there are now people entering their mid-30s who are, as people in their mid-30s do, reaching positions of power and responsibility in major organisations. And what's important about them being in their mid-30s is they were using Google on day one at work. So they're real digital natives. And they will come to those positions of power and responsibility with expectations and understanding that perhaps people who are in their 50s and 60s don't have. And they will begin to say, we need to change. And we think we're going to see a lot more of that playing out, not just this year, but beyond. That's pretty much it. Questions?
Mark?
Yes.
We have a couple of Twitter questions.
Okay.
Shall we go first?
Yeah, please.
Okay, first one was really early in the presentation. Is from Jesus Nuriel. What will the key changes be in business and design during 2013, and what should you do about it?
Just summarize everything.
So if I try and find the sort of threads that link all of this together, I think if I was in a business which was established now, I think I would spend a lot of time focusing on how mobile is going to continue to change my business. And I define mobile very broadly to include tablets as well. So it's clearly challenging and disrupting a lot. And I think at a very big level, that's the question you should be asking is, how is it going to challenge and disrupt what I do? And how is it going to enable more digital disruption? Because I think, if you like, one of our themes is, and we hit it with the first one about peer-to-peer, digital has really messed up content industries over the last 15 years and reshaped them into something new and better. I mean, I'd rather have Spotify than I would my record collection. I'd rather have Netflix than I would old TV channels. But now we're seeing that expand into other industries. So I think all industries need to look long and hard at themselves and say, what are the big changes we can expect to see? And what are we going to do to grapple with this? Yeah.
Second and last Twitter question is from Luis Saiz. Is that you?
It's me, yeah, no.
Okay, so you said like something like looked like a question. Maybe
No, it's a rhetorical question.
Okay, so that's it for Twitter.
What was the question?
No, it's if the new rental business models, if there is some opportunity for rating on customers.
For rating?
Rating.
Yeah, I would have thought that would be a given.
It was most a rhetorical question.
Yeah. It'll surely be a deep part of it.
Regarding the inefficiencies in the app marketplaces, do you see anything coming up this year to solve, or maybe to build on the opportunity for that?
No, but that may just be ignorance, and I might just not have seen it. In fact, it's very likely. The place to look will be Mobile World Congress next week in Barcelona. I think, ask me the question again in a week and a half's time. But I'll definitely, there's lots of things to look for at Mobile World Congress. I think that will be a key one to try and understand. But I think it's still, I find it difficult to believe that we have these two ecosystems. We have the internet and we have the app ecosystem. And they have touch points. But I really want to be able to find things across both of them without regarding them as being separate, compartmentalized things. And that hasn't emerged yet, that model, which will do both at the same time. There's a company, if you want to watch that, if you're really Flurry, F-L-U-R-R-Y. So they have a really brilliant blog where their CEO and other people at Flurry talk about this stuff all the time. And Flurry really know what's going on, and they're really worth. You'll probably hear of that first.
Hello. Do you think that the students know more about the future than their teachers, and the junior people at the companies and organizations know much more about the future than their bosses?
So there's a, you're not a student. So the wisdom of crowds, I think that if you aggregate together what those students know, do they know better than their professor? Yes. Because I'm quite a big believer in the wisdom of crowds. I mean, it's a long story I'll not bore you with now, but a long time ago I created a TV format in the UK where the followers of a football club would choose who played every week. Because theoretically 40,000 people know better than one manager. That's how the stock market works. That's why most people can't outperform the stock market. It's luck if you outperform the stock market, because the crowd knows better than even the most gifted analyst. It's been proven again and again. So if that's true, then that means that, how big is Bernabeu? 80,000, 90,000? 80, 90,000 people know better than Mourinho. I don't think he'd like that. But it's probably true. So aggregated together, yes, I think they probably do.
Yes, can you say something more about the future for the advertising industry? Because this is getting very complicated for the advertisers. All this world we see, you've described very good here. So can you tell us something more about how is the future in this direction? What do they have to do, advertising industry? Thank you.
So I have to confess, before I answer the question, I have to confess to an inbuilt bias. It may be because when I was 22 and I left university, I tried to get into advertising and I couldn't get a job. But it's also because I do really genuinely believe that advertising is in terrible trouble. But the problem with that statement is that it's advantageous to my company with what I'm going to say next, which is that I think the delivery of services is becoming much more important than the marketing of those services. And that's, that's probably always been true, but it's especially true in the digital and social digital age. So I think that's posing some very difficult questions for advertising, and I think the clock is ticking. I do not think that advertising, I'm not so radical as to believe that advertising will go away altogether. I think that's ludicrous. As long as there is spare space somewhere, there will always be businesses that want to tell you about their business and will try to shout at you about their business with either greater or lesser success. So advertising is not going to go away. It's nonsense to suggest that. But I do think that its business model will change over the next 10 years because I think it's becoming harder to justify in a number of environments.
Hi. Have you come across corporate social responsibility innovations on digital?
I think this is not quite the answer you're looking for, so it's tangential to what you're asking. The biggest single area of where I think digital is going to play what I would call a social responsible role over the next 10 years is in health. So the big picture for digital, and it's incredibly exciting and very challenging, is that we all know that we live in an age when we cannot afford the healthcare which we think we need, or we want to have, or we aspire to have, or that there is the technology to give us. So, in other words, the technology is out there to give us better healthcare, but a lot of it is very expensive, whether it's expensive pills or expensive scanners. And the older and fatter society gets, and those are both facts demographically right now, and one of them is very difficult to stop, and the other one is, the older is impossible to stop, and the fatter is difficult to stop, very. As that happens, so we are getting a delta between what society wants and what society can afford. We believe passionately that digital has a role to play in bridging that gap. And the role that it has, in a nutshell, is giving people the tools to take more responsibility around their own health and well-being. And that will be via your phone or something like it. And that, I think, is the biggest social responsibility thing of all that digital will do over the next 10 to 20 years. And just to justify that statement, I've had 2 conversations in the last 4 months with different people who were saying the problem we're trying to crack is that with diabetes patients, you can tell them the things they need to do so that they don't go from chronic to acute, but they often won't do it. So they don't do its diet, its exercise, it's diet and exercise mainly, and they won't do these things because they forget. So anything that we can create digitally which will help transform their habits into something which is more sustainable, the amount of money you save society by getting just diabetes users not to have acute... When something goes wrong with diabetes, you can lose an arm or an eye, and it's, or die. It's extremely serious. And resolving it is extremely expensive for society. And that's just one illness.
So do you see it coming from the government investment or private investment?
I think it's going to be a combination of the two. I don't think governments have yet got the nerve to say to society, actually, we're not going to be able to afford to give you the healthcare you want, so you better take it into your hands. I think that's a very unpalatable political message. So I think it will largely come from private, and I think government will get with the programme eventually.
You touched on the mobile wallets, and your comment was sort of like which are the ones that are going to win out in the end. In my personal opinion, I don't think there's going to be one, and because I know Walmart with somebody else is doing one, Telefonica is doing one, probably everyone wants to do one. So I just wanted to get your opinion on that whole thing.
I think you're probably right. I don't think everyone can win because there's so many people competing in that space right now. A lot of people competing in that space. What I think I said was I think PayPal and Square are ahead of the others at the moment. But I didn't believe, I wouldn't say, I think there's certainly, I don't think there's going to be one winner. Again, I think banks have a huge role to play there, and I think are beginning to think highly innovatively, and they have an enormous amount of power because of the data they've got. So I would expect them to continue to play, if not accelerate, the leading role they're playing in that space at the moment.
Thank you, Chad. Just a quick question. Do you think this year would be the year that we might see how business models might capture value? What I mean by that is we see a lot of capacity to create value, deliver value, but very few business models out there really capture that, aside from mobile advertising. So what I mean by that is, for example, Instagram. They created value, they delivered the value, but what's the business worth? There's no cash flow.
Yes.
So do you think this might be the year, or are we still a year or two off? Although I think the banks and financial institutions are coming up with capture models, per se, for example, PayPal and Square, but the other industries, I don't really see a business model. A lot of times the startups or exit strategy is sell themselves, and if they can't sell themselves, they sell the banks.
Yeah. I think it's, I don't know that we'll see it this year. I mean, you've just articulated what we were saying, trying to say with the mobile gap, which is, that gap is very real. And you're right, the Instagram one is easy to point at, but as a cynic would say, and rightly, they're still not really making very much money. And I don't think we'll see one winning solution emerge this year. I think we will see a lot of experimentation. That's really what and that'll be driven by the gap this year.
Because I think that's also related to the data, or the security feeling with the data, is that if I'm using a free app and I put my personal information out there, I mean, how do I know, for example, Instagram, all of a sudden it said, okay, when I change the privacy on necessarily a whole lot of those.
Well, I think you're very right to ask that question. I mean, I think a user would be very right to ask that question. And interestingly, you know, it's easy to experience if you've ever done a usability testing and seen people on one side of the mirror while they're looking at stuff. Users do ask themselves these questions consciously a lot of the time. There's a, you know, what's the trade-off that's happening here? How do they? I saw something being tested once, and it was a mobile dating service, and the users were they were saying, how do these guys make money? Because they saw the word free, so they then started asking the question.
The business model is free, but the product is free. You're free with the product, so
yeah, that's a good point.
Hello. Do you think that 3D printing is a technology to watch this year, or is too?
Yes, I do. I didn't actually. So I had a big argument with someone about this in November, and I was a skeptic that it was one. And then she produced the argument. She produced the staple stuff, and I crumbled at that stage because I thought, well, you know, if it's going into, you know, shopping malls in America, then people will be talking about it, and it will begin to happen. I mean, I don't know what you do, but do you have to worry about 3D printing this year? Probably not. Is it something to keep an eye on because changes might happen quite rapidly? Yes, I mean, if you look at the price point for 3D printers, they're £1,400, euros. So that's kind of, I mean, I wouldn't buy one at that rate, but I'll start to keep an eye on them. They begin to come into my orbit of things to think about that I might either buy or perhaps have access to at some stage in the future.
Hey Mark, one question. You speak about peer-to-peer services, big data, social services and whatever. So what's your bet on the future of privacy?
On the future of privacy? I think we all have to accept that we're going to have a lot less privacy. A lot less. I just think it's gone. I think there will be, what's done with the data will be somewhere where there will be enormous arguments. And consumers will rightly have a lot to say, and should have a lot to say. But I think, I mean, you know, it's just as a demographic thing as well. You just talk to 25-year-olds, their concern levels over privacy are much, much lower than the concern levels of 50-year-olds, which are in turn lower than 75-year-olds. So I think there's a sort of demographic thing feeding through that. But I also think that what's happening with technology and you know, with things like DNA, which goes way beyond what Fjord does, or my level of expertise, you know, I should say. But with things like DNA, the speed of advance in that science means that there are going to be some very big ethical questions extremely soon. So I think what we can say with certainty is there will be a great bit of moral debate about it. What I can say, because I believe it's the case, but I couldn't be 100% certain on it, is that it will largely swing towards privacy becoming less meaningful. Enough? Yes. Yeah.
Mark, you didn't talk about people's participation as a trend, like voting, the fingerprint, for example.
So, like?
People's participation on political initiatives or anything.
Okay.
You don't see any trend coming this year, any country, any region coming with a different way of people participating and voting, and you know?
You're right, we haven't talked about that at all. I suppose my honest answer is it's not an area I've personally thought about a lot, so I don't think I can answer your question with any validity. Would I like it to happen? Yes, but that's, you know, a different thing from whether it's going to happen. And clearly, you know, again, the technology is there. It's not difficult technology to do it all. The economic situation is there. We're all feeling the pain, to a greater or lesser degree. But I also sense that certainly, so this is politically, I can only really speak about the UK here, but society is considerably less radical, or is considerably less polarized in politics than it was in the 1970s or 1960s. So when we had things like the miners' strike in the UK, and there was violence all over the place because the miners were fighting for their jobs, and Thatcher was killing their jobs, and that caused a whole heap of trouble in the UK. We haven't seen stuff like that in Britain for some time, except around the Gulf War. So, so the counter trend to the wish that it might happen is, I think people have become less polarised politically, and therefore there's less fire in their belly. It depends how deep the recession goes. Depression is a depression. It depends how deep the depression goes before we get there. Clearly, it's an issue in Greece. I know because I've seen that there's more of an issue here than it used to be, and there is a lot of pain being felt. It's notable that I've been here now for 24 hours, and I've certainly had 4 or 5 conversations about the state of the economy. How does it feel in Madrid compared to London, etc., etc. So people are really, really very, but I don't know whether that's going to burst out into more people power. The other thing to think about, we like to think about what we call the donuts. So the donuts are where, it's just a metaphor, there's a protective ring of something which professionals do. So a good donut is in the health area. So doctors believe they do medicine. The thing in the middle of the donut, which is what we really want, is health. But they think they're doing medicine. And when digital comes in and disrupts that, then what it does is it creates a disruption in it where people begin to demand the thing that they want, and digital is going to give it to them. And we see that happening with education, and we see it happening with health. So then you have to think, well, what areas are we not going to see this in? And the thing to look for is how big are the walls that the people inside that donut have built to protect themselves from horrible people like you and I. And I can think of 2 industries where they built very high walls with barbed wire on top, and that's politics and the law. So don't expect law to be disrupted by digital anytime in the near future, because lawyers are very clever and they built very big walls around themselves. And I think the same thing is true of politics to some extent. They don't want to be disrupted, and they're going to fight like hell not to. Doctors don't really either, but I think they're going to have to give up quite soon. 5 years.
Hi. You talk about user-generated content, and you also mentioned access as a trend, access to content, or not the content itself. Do you see that this would have an impact on content creators' business models?
Yes.
In a way that piracy would go down or something, or that we would find a viable business model somewhere?
I'm not sure I know what impact it will have on, I don't know what impact it will have necessarily on piracy. There will always be pirates out there who will seek to copy digital stuff because it's so easy to copy technically and then distribute it, which is slightly harder to do, and then not be caught, which is very hard. But will it create new business models for content owners? Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. And it's already causing, so the shift to access rather than, here's what somewhere where the shift to access is playing out is causing a problem. So if you're a TV channel, or you're a broadcast company, the shift there is away from people paying via advertising or a subscription to watch your channel towards what Netflix are now doing, which is you pay a subscription and you get absolutely everything. So it's subscription video on demand rather than payment video on demand. And the big thing there is any channel wanting to do that is then doing something enormously difficult. They've got to start dealing with people rather than businesses. And they then have to start building up a whole mentality around how they deal with those people. So if you want to do a subscription video on demand service, you actually have to begin to figure out how to deal with customers who are going to pay you money, as opposed to, members of the public are going to pay you money, as opposed to channel owners who you might have done a deal with. And that's an enormous shift in their business model. And the big problem for them is then how do they do customer care? So they've got to rethink large parts of their business. I met with, in another market, somebody who's going to launch they own the law rights, and they're going to launch a subscription video on demand model, a bit like Netflix. And we sat and we said, what are you going to do about customer care? And he didn't know. He hadn't really thought about it. And it was a good conversation, but he hadn't thought about it. Does that answer your question a bit? Okay, well, thank you very much. Fantastic question.